My son invited me to his wedding, not to honor me, but to humiliate me. 15 years after walking out of prison, I arrived in silence, behind the wheel of a Maybach. He expected a broken woman. What he saw changed both our lives forever. Hello, dear friends. Please write in the comments which city or country you're watching from. I'd love to know where everyone is joining us from. Enjoy listening. I used to believe a mother could outlove any sentence. Love, I thought, could pass through concrete, slip under steel doors, and stitch what the world tore apart. That belief kept me breathing in a cell where the window was the size of a book and the light never reached the corners. They processed me into North Ridge Women's Correctional on a wet November morning when the air tasted like pennies. The intake nurse didn't look up when she asked my name. Porter, Elaine, I said. She checked a box and handed me a bundle folded so tight it might have been a threat. Grey. Everything was grey. I held it to my chest, like a child holds a pillow, and tried not to calculate how many years of my life were now measured by the clang of doors. I had been a bookkeeper at a logistics company outside Atlanta, the kind of place where trucks lined up at dawn and men stood with clipboards pretending the world was simple. Numbers in, numbers out. It wasn't simple. It was a pile of small compromises waiting for a spark. My employer, a man with cufflinks that winked like secrets, asked me to clean a few accounts. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone would miss, he said. Then a shipment vanished, and the investigators arrived with smiles that meant they had already decided the ending. By the time my public defender learned to say my last name without glancing at his watch, I had given up on being understood. A jury listened to strangers talk about me as if I were an idea, not a person, and then they sent the idea away. 7 years, the judge said, and the number rang through me like a struck bell. I remember thinking, I will never stop hearing that. Marcus was 16 and angrier than the world had room for. He wore his anger the way boys wear new jackets, stiff, proud, and ready for rain. He didn't come to the sentencing. He wouldn't meet my eyes in the last seconds before the deputies led me out. My sister, Ruth, sat behind him with her mouth pressed so tight I thought it would leave a mark. She whispered, "We'll take care of him." I nodded, as if hope had not already slipped past my fingers. Prison teaches you to measure time in unnatural ways. The first week is an ocean, every minute a wave. You drown and do not die. The second week, you learn the choreography of survival. Eyes down in the hall, back straight in line. Joke only when it's safe to be seen laughing. The third week, you begin to count not hours, but noises. Keys. Boots. The cough of the woman 2 bunks over who sings hymns when she sleeps. I wrote to Marcus every Sunday. I wrote as if the paper could grow hands and carry me home. I apologized for the silence I could not help, the absence I could not prevent. I told him about the librarian, a tiny woman with a spine like a sword, who slid me novels through the slot as if she were dealing mercy. I told him about the chapel where the fluorescent lights buzzed like irritated angels, and where, once, I cried without sound until my throat ached. I am still your mother, I wrote in every letter, because I was terrified of the day the sentence would burn that truth away. In the second spring, one of my envelopes came back with a yellow sticker. Return to sender. Moving, no forwarding address. The 3 words took up more space in my cell than I did. I folded the envelope so carefully it would not scream and put it under my pillow. Ruth visited that month. She wore a lemon dress and grief on her cheekbones. "He's with friends," she said, eyes skittering to the guard, to the clock, to any surface that wasn't my face. "He's finishing school. He's fine." Fine is what people say when they've run out of facts. There is a myth about prison, that it's all iron and cruelty. But there is tenderness too, quiet and illicit. One winter, a woman named Peaches, who could break your nose and then bake you biscuits, slid a paper crane onto my tray. "For your boy," she said, winking. "So he knows his mama knows how to fold the sky." I kept that crane in a plastic bag, like it was a living thing, its wings flattened but ready. A chaplain once asked me if I believed in justice. I told him I believed in math. 2 and 2 make 4. And yet, somehow, I was here. He laughed, and there was kindness in it. "Sometimes God counts differently," he said. I didn't say what I thought, that if God was counting, he had skipped my name the day the gavel fell. On the morning of my 4th year, they assigned me to the laundry. Heat wrapped the room in a fever. We ran sheets through the rollers and watched them emerge like the ghosts of better nights. Smooth, pale, anonymous. I found a rhythm that made my thoughts less sharp. Wash, press, fold, wash, press, fold. It was a mantra made of usefulness. If you can find a way to be useful, you can belong somewhere, even in a place built to erase. Belonging is a tricky word. Some women wore their sentences like tattoos that told a story. I did this. I paid for it. It is part of me. My story felt like the outline of a tattoo I had not chosen. Truth be told, there were parts of me that did not miss the old world. The way men in offices let their eyes rest too long. The way neighbors whispered bad luck as if it were contagious. Inside, everything was brutally honest. You had what you had, and nobody pretended your hunger was a diet. I kept writing to Marcus, even after the letters stopped coming back, which is another way of saying I kept a dialogue with silence. I told him about the woman in B block who could fix radios with a bent hairpin and a prayer. I told him about reading to new arrivals who shook so hard the pages trembled. I told him about the night a storm came down like a judgment and the power died. And for one perfect minute, the dark was complete. So complete we could imagine we were anywhere else. On visiting days, I watched other mothers practice forgiveness with their eyes. The glass between them and their children was not thick enough to muffle a lifetime of small harms, yet some of them smiled as if the future were already absolving the past. I tried to mimic that smile in the metal mirror above the sink. It looked wrong on me, like I had borrowed a face from a softer woman. The 7th year began with a rumor that my case might be reviewed. "New evidence," someone whispered in the yard, as if saying it too loud would scare it away. I didn't let myself celebrate. Prison teaches you that joy is expensive and often counterfeit. But the rumor made me walk a little taller on the track. That afternoon, the sky opened and poured so hard, the yard became a silver sheet. We lifted our faces to it like flowers. Water streaked the concrete, pooling in the dips where our steps had worn it thin. "Baptized," Peaches said, laughing. "Look at us, saints for the length of a storm." The review came and went, with less drama than a haircut. A new associate at the DA's office read through my file and decided the paper trail that had seemed so neat in court was a tangle after all. My employer, it turned out, had needed a fall person more than he had needed a ledger keeper. No one apologized. They just put a form in front of me and told me to sign, and then they told me to wait. Waiting is a skill I perfected, like balancing a coin on its edge. I was released in early summer. A guard I didn't know walked me to a door that had meant never for so long it had grown a second meaning. Not for you. Sunlight lay outside in a wide, ridiculous band. The guard cleared his throat. "Porter," he said, as if saying my name might change the weather. "Good luck." The air smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt, like childhood and distance. On the bus into the city, I sat by the window and watched Georgia unspool. Billboards that promised miracles you could finance. Churches with parking lots the size of county fairs. Trees that looked surprised to still be growing. I saw my face in the reflection. Older, yes, but not broken. A woman you might ask directions from and believe. At the halfway house, they gave me a room with a bed that wasn't nailed down. I lay on it and laughed out loud, because it felt scandalous to move a piece of furniture with my own hands. On the nightstand sat a list of places that hired people like me. A diner, a warehouse, a cleaning service, a non-profit with a name like a polite nod. I ran my finger down the list until the letters blurred. I slept with the window cracked open and woke to the sound of early traffic, a city clearing its throat before it began to speak. I wrote to Marcus that first week out, the way a diver writes the surface. I am in the world again, I said. I am learning its new grammar. I didn't know if he would read it. I didn't know where he lived or who he had become. But I tucked the letter into an envelope anyway, because rituals keep us from drifting. On Sunday, I walked to a church that had a sign offering coffee and a reasonable God. The sanctuary smelled like lemons and wood polish. A woman with a voice made of velvet sang about rivers that forget your name when you wade in deep enough. I stood in the back and let the song move through me, rearranging furniture I didn't know could be moved. When the service ended, I didn't stay for coffee. I wasn't ready to answer the question, "Where have you been?" with the truth. I crossed the street, paused at a flower stall, and bought a single white peony. I put it in a jar by my window and watched it open slowly, the way some doors take their time for a reason. The day I found steady work, washing dishes at a hotel where the lobby smelled like success and forgotten luggage, I thought of Marcus. I wondered if he'd ever see me the way a stranger might. A woman scrubbing plates with care, building a life in the steam and clatter, turning circles into progress. I wondered if, when he told his story, I still showed up as a shadow, or if I had graduated to a cautionary tale. It hurt less than it once had, that wondering. Pain, like joy, is a muscle. I didn't know then that a white envelope would soon find me again. I didn't know it would smell faintly of roses, that the paper would be thick, that inside the calligraphy would be perfect and merciless. I didn't know I was being invited to witness the version of my son the world applauded, and I didn't yet know how I would arrive. The first months of freedom were made of small, trembling victories. I learned how to stand in grocery store aisles again, how to choose between 20 kinds of bread without panicking, how to look at people without expecting suspicion in their eyes. Freedom, it turned out, was not a door opening. It was a hallway with flickering lights, and every step echoed. The hotel kitchen became my new world. Stainless steel, the hiss of water, the steady music of plates touching each other. I liked the rhythm. Dishes did not lie. Soap and heat could make them clean again, which was more mercy than most of us ever got. At night, I walked back to the halfway house under street lamps that hummed like sleepy insects, and sometimes I would whisper Marcus's name into the dark, just to remind myself it still sounded human. One evening, after a double shift, a woman in a navy blazer came to the kitchen door. "You Elaine Porter?" she asked, reading from a clipboard. "Yes, ma'am." "You're being transferred. New placement. Transitional program downtown." Her voice was efficient, like a machine that didn't care about context. I packed my things, 2 shirts, a book of psalms, and the paper crane Peaches had folded for me years ago. The new place was called Horizon House, and it looked nothing like the name suggested. 3 floors of tired paint and women with eyes that could read pain fluently. But there was warmth there. Coffee brewing, someone laughing down the hall, a bulletin board with job ads and hand-drawn hearts. The director, Miss Joanne, was a broad-shouldered woman with silver locks and the calm of someone who had already seen the worst. "You work?" she asked. "Yes, dishwashing." "Good. Work keeps the ghosts from talking too loud." She walked me through the hall and stopped by a small office where a younger woman was sorting paperwork. "This is Tasha. She handles outreach. We help women like us find work, housing, maybe even hope." Tasha looked up and smiled, not the pitying kind, the kind that believes you could actually stand again. I started spending evenings helping the newer arrivals fill out forms. Some couldn't read well. Some couldn't stop shaking long enough to write. I didn't have training, but I knew how it felt to be invisible. That knowledge turned out to be a skill. After 6 months, the hotel offered me a promotion, supervisor of the night cleaning crew. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with a raise and a uniform that made me look like I belonged somewhere. Miss Joanne called it progress. I called it breathing without guilt. One night, after my shift, I sat in the break room and found a newspaper someone had left behind. On the business page, there was a small photo. A man in a dark suit shaking hands with a local developer. Marcus Porter, the caption read, "Co-founder of Porter and Hale Investments." My breath caught. He looked taller, broader. His smile was polished. But his eyes, those eyes were the same boy's eyes who used to hide behind my coat in thunderstorms. My hands trembled. Pride, grief, confusion, a cocktail no bartender could balance. He had built something. He had made a name clean enough to shine under headlines, and nowhere in that article was I, not even a shadow. I folded the paper and placed it beside my bag, as if it might burn through the table. Then I laughed, quiet, not bitter. He was doing what I had prayed he would do: survive, succeed, stay far from the ruin that had swallowed me. Still, that night, I cried. Not because I was angry, but because there was no one to tell that my boy had made it. Weeks passed, and the ache turned into motion. I started collecting stories from women at Horizon House, stories the world ignored. A mother who learned to fix engines because her husband burned her mechanic shop down. A grandmother who sold hand-sewn quilts to pay for her daughter's lawyer. Each story was a bruise that healed in the telling. I realized then, survival is contagious. If one woman stands up, another finds her legs. With Miss Joanne's blessing, I began organizing weekend workshops, teaching basic bookkeeping, how to open a bank account, how to fill a tax form. It was small, messy, and holy. Somewhere between the coffee stains and the laughter, I rediscovered the part of myself that used to build things that lasted. One evening, a journalist from a local paper visited Horizon House for an article on community programs. He asked me to share my story. I hesitated. Old fear still lived in my throat. But Miss Joanne squeezed my shoulder. "Truth don't lose power when it's spoken by the broken," she said. So I told him, not everything, but enough. How I fell, how I crawled, how I built a life out of pieces no one else wanted. He listened without interrupting, and the next week, my name appeared in print, not as a headline of shame, but as Elaine Porter, program coordinator at Horizon House. I clipped the article, folded it into my journal, and thought, if Marcus ever stumbles upon this, maybe he'll know his mother didn't vanish. She transformed. By the second year, the workshops had become something bigger, a registered non-profit called Second Light Foundation. We found sponsors, small at first, then steady. Women came from 3 states to learn, to rest, to start again. I wrote grants at night, praying over every line. And when the first check arrived, I held it to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for recycling miracles." I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment near the river. It was small, but mine. A window with morning light, a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon when I cooked. On Sundays, I walked along the pier, watching families take photos, boats gliding by like slow prayers. Sometimes I'd imagine Marcus among them, his arm around a woman I didn't know, his laughter carried by the wind. I told myself that was enough, to know he was alive, thriving. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I was leaving the office, a courier handed me an envelope sealed in gold. The handwriting on the front made my knees weaken. "Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Porter invite you to celebrate their wedding. Date, venue, RSVP." The paper smelled faintly of roses. I read the lines twice, then a third time, as if they might rearrange themselves into mercy. Was this an olive branch, or a stage for humiliation? My heart wanted to believe the first, but the tremor in my hands knew the second. That night, I sat by the window and stared at the city lights blinking like restless eyes. If I went, I would risk reopening scars that had finally stopped bleeding. If I didn't, I'd stay the ghost they'd buried years ago. Miss Joanne found me there, letter in my lap. "You gonna go?" she asked. "I don't know." She nodded, slow, then pray till you do. So I prayed, not for forgiveness, not for courage, but for clarity. 3 days later, I walked into a dealership. The salesman greeted me with that familiar hesitation, the look people give when they can't decide if you belong here. "I'm looking for something quiet," I said. "Something that doesn't need to prove anything." He showed me cars with price tags that looked like mistakes. Then he stopped beside a deep grey Maybach. Its lines were simple, confident. It didn't scream. It whispered. "This one," I said. He blinked. "Would you like to test drive it?" "No need. I already know how it feels to drive something you've earned." I signed the papers with steady hands. Outside, sunlight slid across the hood like a benediction. I touched the cool metal and thought of every step, every night, every prayer that had led here. When the car door closed, the sound was soft, final, like a chapter folding itself shut. I sat there for a long time, my hands on the wheel, breathing in leather and redemption. The invitation lay on the seat beside me, the gold edges glinting. I whispered to it, "All right then, Marcus. Let's finish this story properly." The road to Charleston stretched long and clean, a silver ribbon cut through green fields and gentle rain. I drove in silence. No music, no talk radio. Just the soft hum of the Maybach's engine and the steady rhythm of wipers sweeping away the past. For 7 years I had lived by the sound of locks and metal gates. Now I moved by the sound of air, of distance, of freedom measured in miles instead of minutes. Every exit sign felt like a question. Are you ready? When I crossed into South Carolina, the sky broke open into sunlight, sharp and forgiving. I thought of Marcus then, the small boy who used to collect shells by the lake, who once said he'd buy me a blue house so I could live inside the sky. And now he was a man with a company, a name, a life that had no room for me. I stopped at a small roadside cafe just past Beaufort. The waitress was middle-aged, kind-eyed, and curious enough to ask where I was headed. "To a wedding," I said. She smiled. "Yours?" I laughed softly. "No, my son's." "Well," she said, pouring coffee, "that's still love showing up." Her words stayed with me long after I paid the bill and left. The city appeared by the coast, like an old secret polished by time. Charleston, graceful, deceptive, humming with wealth and history. The kind of place where even the ghosts wore perfume. I arrived 2 days before the wedding and checked into a modest inn near the harbour. The woman at the front desk gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes when she saw the car. That was fine. I didn't need approval, only quiet. My room overlooked the water. At night, I watched the lights from distant boats shimmer across the black surface like broken promises trying to become stars. I thought of the letter again, the perfect script, the delicate gold border, the way my name looked like it belonged to someone else. I imagined how Marcus must have written it. Did he pause before sealing the envelope? Did he picture me holding it, reading it, wondering? Or was it his fiancée's idea, a gesture of obligation dressed as kindness? Her name was Sienna, I'd learned from the invitation. Sienna Hale. A name like a soft piano note. The Hale family owned half of Charleston's waterfront, according to the internet. Developers, old money, social pages and charity galas. The kind of people who smiled with perfect teeth and perfect contempt. I wondered if she knew who I was, what I'd been. The next morning, I bought a dress, not extravagant, not loud. A smooth white suit, clean lines, no jewelry, but the small pearl earrings I'd worn at Marcus's christening. A pair of beige heels that made me feel grounded, not taller. When the tailor pinned the hem, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "It suits you." I smiled. It's been a long time since anything has. That evening, I wrote a letter I didn't know whether I'd deliver. It began simply. "Marcus, I don't know why you invited me. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I'm coming. Not for the world to see me, but for me to see you. Whatever happens, know this. I never stopped being your mother." I sealed it, placed it in my purse, and slept with the ocean whispering through the window. The day of the wedding arrived like a ceremony before the ceremony. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, dust particles dancing like tiny confessions in the air. I ironed the suit with deliberate calm, folded my scarf, applied light makeup, the kind that doesn't hide age, only softens it. When I stepped outside, the Maybach waited, gleaming under the magnolia trees. The driver, a quiet man named Samuel, whom I'd hired through the inn, opened the door. "Ready, Mom?" "As I'll ever be." The ride was short but eternal. Through the window, I saw Charleston's streets unfurl. Cobblestones, verandas, palms bowing under the weight of summer air. Guests filled the gardens of a grand estate by the water, laughter and camera flashes catching like static. Men in tailored suits, women in dresses that looked like soft clouds. Samuel slowed near the gate. I caught my reflection in the glass. Composed, unrecognizable. The woman staring back at me was not the prisoner, not the mother in shame. She was the sum of everything I had survived, not perfect, but undeniable. "Would you like me to open the door, Mom?" Samuel asked. I nodded. The door opened with a sigh, and the world turned toward the sound. Heels on stone, heads shifting, whispers rising like heat. For a heartbeat, I could feel their gaze crawling across my skin. The scandal returned to life in their eyes. And then, silence. Complete, sudden, like the world had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Marcus stood at the far end of the garden, under an arch of white roses. He was beautiful, in that painful way men become when you realize they no longer need you. For a moment, I saw the little boy again. Mud on his shoes, jelly on his chin, eyes searching for me. Then I blinked. and he was the stranger in a suit. His bride turned to see what had frozen him. When her gaze met mine, her smile faltered. Recognition flickered, not of my face, but of the story attached to it. I could almost hear the whisper travel from one guest to another. That's her, the mother, the one who went to prison. I walked forward, each step measured, each breath a decision. The air smelled of roses and salt and something burning, maybe pride. An usher moved to intercept me, unsure. I handed him the invitation. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Every whisper was a ghost from the past, and I walked straight through them. At the edge of the seating rows, a woman I didn't know gestured toward an empty chair in the back. I nodded my thanks and sat, hands clasped, spine tall. The ceremony resumed, but the room, the world, had changed. Marcus tried to focus on the officiant's words, but his eyes drifted back to me again and again, like a compass refusing to obey. Sienna noticed. Her fingers tightened around his hand. When the vows began, I listened to his promises, his future, his carefully curated life. I smiled faintly. He sounded rehearsed, like a man speaking lines he'd spent years practicing, the kind of lines that erase where you came from. When they kissed, the applause was polite, but I could feel the tremor under it. Every guest was wondering what story they'd tell later. The wedding was lovely, except for me, and that was fine. Let them tell it. I'd lived worse stories. During the reception, I stayed at the edge of the garden near the water. The breeze smelled of jasmine and champagne. People avoided my gaze politely, like grief at a celebration. It was almost funny. Then I heard his voice behind me. Low, careful. Mom? I turned. Marcus stood a few feet away, tie loosened, eyes stormed over with emotions he didn't know how to name. Marcus, I said. His name felt heavy in my mouth, like a word I'd carried too long in silence. He glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Why did you come? He asked. Because you invited me. His jaw clenched. I didn't think you would. Then why send the invitation? I don't know. Maybe to see if you'd finally let go. I looked at him for a long moment. He had his father's posture, shoulders squared, chin high, and my eyes, dark and stubborn. I did let go, I said quietly. That's why I could come. He looked away, swallowed something sharp. You shouldn't have. I smiled, soft but unshaken. Maybe. But sons shouldn't forget their mothers either. His silence was louder than the music drifting from the tent. Sienna called for him from across the lawn, her voice wrapped in sugar and impatience. He hesitated, then turned back to me. I'll send someone to drive you home, he said. I shook my head. I have my own car. And before he could answer, I walked away, heels clicking against stone, the sound steady and whole. From the parking lot, I looked back once. The garden glowed under fairy lights. The guests had already turned toward cake and dancing. The story was moving on, without me. Samuel opened the door. Everything all right, Mom? Yes, I said, settling into the seat. Everything's exactly as it should be. The Maybach pulled away slowly, the hum of the engine blending with distant laughter. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, deeply, freely, as Charleston receded in the mirrors, small and gold and done. I didn't know then that this wasn't the end. It was the pause before the reckoning. The morning after the wedding smelled of rain and headlines. I woke before dawn in my small Charleston hotel room, still dressed in yesterday's suit. My reflection in the mirror looked like a ghost that had finally learned to rest. Outside, the harbour fog was thick enough to hide the city, and for a blessed moment, it felt like the whole world was hushed. Then the phone began to buzz. The first message came from Miss Joanne. "Child, are you all right? You on the news?" My stomach tightened. I turned on the TV. Local Channel 7 had a segment titled "Unexpected Guest at Society Wedding." There it was, the Maybach gliding through the gates, my hand on the door, the hush of faces turning. Someone's cell phone had caught it all, and now it looped in slow motion, the caption cruelly elegant. "Estranged mother returns." They didn't say ex-convict. Not yet. But it was there, between every word. I muted the sound. The silence felt safer. Downstairs, the hotel clerk pretended not to recognize me, though curiosity was written all over her. She offered coffee, on the house. I accepted, not out of politeness, but to keep my hands busy. Through the lobby windows, I could see newspapers stacked by the door. On the front page, Porter and Hale, a wedding interrupted by the past. My picture wasn't there, but I could feel its outline in the empty space. I walked out, the paper rustling in the breeze, and sat on a bench overlooking the water. The tide was low. The shore smelled of salt and old things rising again. So this was how shame recycled itself, dressed up, repackaged, but still carrying the same teeth. At noon, I called Miss Joanne. Her voice cracked with relief. "Girl, you made an entrance even Angel's gonna gossip about?" she said. I laughed softly. That wasn't the plan. Maybe not yours, but sometimes God likes to make art out of accidents. She told me the phones at Second Light Foundation hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Donors wanted statements. Women from 3 states had called saying, "That's the lady who walked in like dignity itself." I hadn't expected that. The thought of it made something loosen inside my chest. By afternoon, I packed my bag and checked out. Before leaving, I wrote a short note for Samuel, the driver. "Thank you for waiting without judgment. EP." Then I slipped behind the wheel myself and started the drive home. The highway blurred past in shades of memory. The first night of freedom, the first letter returned, the first paycheck that didn't taste like survival. Each one part of a chain that had finally broken. Halfway to Atlanta, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Elaine Porter?" The voice was male, measured. "Yes." "This is Evan Hale," the groom's father. My grip on the wheel tightened. "Mr. Hale." "I thought you should know," he said, "that what happened yesterday caused quite the stir. My wife is furious, the press is relentless, and Marcus, well, he's not handling it gracefully." "I'm not surprised," I said quietly. He sighed. "Look, I don't care about whatever history you two have, but if you cared about your son, you'd stay out of sight until this dies down." There was the tone I remembered, the one that assumes money buys moral authority. "Mr. Hale," I said, voice calm but steady, "I've spent years being invisible. I'm done practicing disappearance." Then I ended the call. For several miles I drove in silence, the road humming beneath me like applause no one could hear. When I returned to Horizon House, the women were waiting. Someone had taped the newspaper article to the bulletin board. In thick marker, across the top, someone had written, "She showed up." Miss Joanne hugged me so hard, I felt my ribs remember life. "Don't you dare feel shame," she said. "You walked in there and reminded every woman in this place that history can't bury you alive." That night, we cooked a big pot of gumbo and ate on the porch. Laughter filled the air. the kind that knows grief by name but doesn't let it sit at the table too long. When the moon rose, I stepped aside and opened my purse. The letter I'd written to Marcus was still there, unopened. I tore it gently in half, not out of anger, but because I'd already spoken everything I needed to say, just not in words. Days passed. The storm of gossip began to fade, replaced by a slower, quieter wave. Curiosity. Letters arrived at the foundation from women I'd never met. One wrote, "I watched you on the news. You looked like freedom wearing heels." Another said, "If you could walk back into your past and not crumble, maybe I can walk into mine." We started getting donations. Small bills folded inside envelopes, sometimes with notes, sometimes just the words "thank you." I used the money to expand our classes, to buy new computers, to build a library of second chances. Some nights I stayed late, reading those letters, letting them fill the spaces where regret used to live. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered a small box to my office. No return address, just my name, written in the handwriting I would have recognized blindfolded. Inside was a photo. Marcus and me, years ago, at his 10th birthday picnic. He had cake on his face and my arm around his shoulders. Beneath it, a note. "I don't know if I invited you to hurt you or to find you. Either way, you found me first. M." I sat with that for a long time. The edges of the photo curled slightly, as if time itself wanted to hold on. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a door that swings once. It's a gate that opens slowly, with both hands. In late summer, a community organization nominated me for a Resilience Award. When I stood on the small stage, lights in my eyes, applause warm and real, I didn't think of the prison walls or the wedding whispers. I thought of every woman who had ever been told she was too broken to rebuild. I ended my speech with words I hadn't planned. They called me a criminal once, then they called me a scandal. But none of those names stuck because I answered to something louder. Survivor. The room went quiet, then rose in applause that sounded like redemption itself. That night, back home, I drove the Maybach to the riverfront and parked under the old oak trees. The water moved like dark silk. I rolled down the window and let the humid air wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to run or explain or hide. Behind me, the city hummed. Alive, indifferent, forgiving in its own careless way. I whispered, "Peace," and meant it. The phone buzzed once more. A new message. "Dinner? Tomorrow?" M. I smiled. Not the kind that shows teeth. The quiet kind that knows time has finally done its work. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Apology, awkwardness, maybe laughter, maybe not. But for the first time since I stepped out of those prison gates, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. It could come how it wanted, because I was ready, because I was whole, because I had already arrived. The next evening, I sat at a small cafe by the river, the kind of place where time slows down just enough for truth to arrive on foot. The message from Marcus had been brief. "Dinner? Tomorrow?" And I'd simply replied, "Yes." No questions, no conditions. Sometimes you don't need a plan to face the past. You just need to stop running from it. The restaurant was nearly empty when I walked in. Candles flickered on every table. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and wine. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, pearl earrings, and no makeup heavy enough to hide the years. He was already there, sitting by the window. For a moment, I simply watched him. Tall, polished, the kind of man who'd learned to move carefully around fragile things. He stood when he saw me, and for the first time in more than a decade, I saw the boy hiding behind the man. "Hi, Mum," he said. 2 words, uneven, as if his mouth wasn't used to saying them anymore. Marcus. I smiled, small and steady. You look well. He gestured toward the chair. Please, sit. We ordered 2 plates of salmon we wouldn't touch, a bottle of sparkling water between us like a truce flag. For a while, there was only silence, the kind of silence that's thick with memory, every second filled with words left unsaid. Finally, he cleared his throat. I didn't expect you to actually come to the wedding. I noticed, I said gently. He exhaled, rubbed the bridge of his nose. I wasn't trying to hurt you, I swear. I tilted my head. Then what were you trying to do? I don't know. Maybe prove something. To myself. To her. To everyone. He looked up, eyes tired. When people found out you were my mother, it was like a stain I couldn't wash off. I was angry. Not at you, but at how people saw me. And I took that out on you. I let his words settle. He had no idea how many nights I'd imagined this conversation. 1,000 versions, none of them kind, all of them necessary. But this one was real. I know, I said quietly. And I understand. You were a boy handed a burden you didn't earn. He frowned. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it human. He stared at his glass, turning it slowly in his hand. When I sent that invitation, I told myself it was out of duty. But when I saw you step out of that car... He stopped, shaking his head. I felt small. Like every lie I'd told about you shrank to dust in front of everyone. I smiled sadly. The truth has a way of fitting into any room, even the ones it's not invited to. He looked up again, his voice barely a whisper. Were you angry? No, I said. Disappointed, maybe, but not angry. Anger keeps you tied to the past. I served enough time there. Something broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft crack, the sound of a wall finally giving up its reason for existing. He leaned back, exhaling. You always talk like that, like a preacher and a poet had a child. I had 7 years to practice listening to my own thoughts, I said. They needed polishing. He laughed, quietly. The first real laugh between us in more than 15 years. It filled the space better than any apology could. When the waiter brought our food, neither of us touched it. We were full of heavier things. He told me about his company, about the long hours, the meetings, the pressure to prove himself among people who valued bloodlines over backbone. I listened, proud, but also a little sad. Success had become his armor, gleaming, suffocating. After a pause, he said, She didn't know, you know. Sienna, not the full story. I guessed, I said. She does now, after that night, after seeing you. And what does she think? He hesitated. She said she's never seen anyone walk into a room and own it without saying a word. I smiled faintly. She sounds perceptive. She is. She's better than I deserve. For a moment, he looked out the window, lights shimmering on the water. Then, softly, I don't know how to make this right. You don't, I said. You just make it honest. He nodded slowly. Can I start by coming to see where you work? That caught me off guard. You want to come to Horizon House? Yes, I want to see it. The foundation, the women you help. I want to understand who you became when I wasn't looking. For a second, my throat tightened. Of all the things I'd imagined him saying, that wasn't one of them. I'd like that, I said. But only if you come as Marcus, not as the man with the last name people whisper about. He smiled. A real one this time. Deal. We left the restaurant together, walking along the pier. The night was soft, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Waves lapped gently against the wood. The air smelled like rain waiting to happen. He stopped near the edge, hands in pockets. "I kept that photo," he said. "The one of us by the lake. I carried it through college. Then I put it away because it hurt too much." "I know," I said. "You sent it back." He nodded, eyes glinting. "Did you think I wanted forgiveness?" "I think you wanted peace," I said. "And that's harder to find." He exhaled, long and slow. "Maybe we both earned some." For a while, neither of us spoke. The city lights danced on the water like restless ghosts, and I thought of all the women who had told me they couldn't go back to their children, their families, their names. Maybe this was what hope looked like. Not grand, not cinematic, just two people learning how to breathe in the same space again. Before we parted, he turned to me. "Mum, would you come by the office next week? There's something I'd like to talk about. Business, actually." "Business?" He nodded. "Maybe we can do something together. A partnership. Porter and Porter Foundation. Has a nice ring, don't you think?" I laughed softly. "We'll see." But inside, something warm flickered. Not pride, not even forgiveness, but the quiet satisfaction of watching a seed finally break ground. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city below moved like a lullaby of headlights and human stories. On my nightstand sat the newspaper clipping about the foundation, folded and worn. I picked it up, smiled, and slipped it inside a book titled The Long Road Home. Then I whispered, to no one and to everyone. The road was long, but I made it back, not to where I was, but to who I am. The kettle clicked off. The room was still. The future, for the first time, didn't feel like a test. It felt like a promise. The following week, I stood in front of a glass building downtown, sunlight glinting off its edges like pride disguised as architecture. Porter and Hale Investments, the sign read. Bold letters, clean font, polished to perfection. It had been years since I'd walked into a place where money spoke louder than truth. But that day, I walked in on my own terms. The receptionist glanced up, her professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Maybe she recognized the face from the news. Maybe she just felt the gravity of something unspoken. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I replied. "I'm here to see Marcus Porter." She pressed a button. "He's expecting you." I took the elevator to the top floor. The ride was silent except for the soft hum of success. Air conditioning, distant footsteps, the heartbeat of capitalism. But beneath it all, I felt something deeper. Calm. When the doors opened, Marcus was waiting by his office window, city skyline stretching behind him like a crown he wasn't sure how to wear. "Mum?" he said, smiling. "Marcus." He gestured to a seat. "You came." "You asked." We both laughed quietly, as if the world had finally decided to be kind. On his desk lay a stack of papers, glossy brochures, and a framed photo, the same childhood picture he'd mailed me weeks before. He noticed me looking at it. "I put it there this morning," he said. "Reminds me what success is supposed to mean." He slid a folder toward me. "I've been thinking. We have investors asking about social initiatives, outreach, rehabilitation, things that make our company look human." "Things that are human," I corrected softly. He nodded. "Exactly. I want to start a partnership. The company will fund Second Light Foundation, and in return, we'll create a re-entry employment program. Give women real jobs, training, financial independence." I blinked. "You want your mother's foundation to be part of your business?" He smiled. "I want to fix the bridge I burned, and I can't think of anyone stronger to build it with." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Years of silence, pain, judgment, all collapsing into something that looked suspiciously like grace. Finally, I said, "I'll agree, under one condition." He raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That we don't do it for headlines or redemption. We do it because we can." "Deal," he said. "No cameras, just work." We shook hands, formal, firm, equal. Over the next months, the program took shape like something that had been waiting its whole life to exist. We called it the Renewal Initiative. Horizon House became the first pilot site. Marcus's company provided funding and mentorship. I oversaw the training and hiring process. Every Friday, he'd stop by the centre, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, helping women with resumes, sitting in plastic chairs that looked hilariously out of place next to his tailored shirts. At first, the women eyed him with suspicion, another businessman pretending to care. But then they saw the way he listened, really listened, and the suspicion turned to respect. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me from across the room, that half smile that said, "I see you now." One evening, after a long day of interviews, we sat outside Horizon House, sharing coffee as the sky dimmed. The sound of cicadas filled the air, steady and familiar. "You know," Marcus said, "I used to think success meant building something so high that no one could look down on you again." "And now?" I asked. "Now I think it means building something other people can stand on." I nodded. "That's the lesson prison taught me. The ground only feels solid when you're helping someone else find their footing." He smiled, leaned back. "You sound like a sermon again." "Maybe I am one," I said, half joking. "An old one, but still preaching." We laughed together, the kind of laughter that cleans a room. Months passed. The program spread to 3 more cities. News outlets eventually heard, but this time the story wasn't about scandal. It was about impact. Headlines read, "From convict to community leader, Elaine Porter's second light expands nationwide." I didn't care about the fame, but it meant more doors opened for the women still trapped in shadows. At a gala celebrating the initiative, Marcus gave a speech. He stood on stage in a simple suit, no pomp, no bravado. He said, "I once tried to erase my past to look respectable, but the truth is, my past raised me. She's sitting right there." He gestured toward me. The crowd turned. Applause swelled, thick and warm. I didn't cry. I just met his gaze and nodded, small, proud, complete. Later that night, I stepped outside for air. The city lights glittered like promises we'd finally kept. Marcus joined me, hands in his pockets. "You remember that Maybach?" he asked. I chuckled. "Hard to forget." "You still have it?" "I do, but I don't drive it much." "Why not?" "Because it's a story that's already been told." He smiled. "Then let's write a new one." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and handed them to me. Not to a car, but to a new building downtown. "Our new headquarters for the foundation," he said. "Paid for, renovated, ready to open next month. You'll need somewhere to park that story of yours." I stared at the keys, then at him. "You don't owe me this, Marcus." "I know," he said. "That's why it means something." For a moment, I saw not the man he'd become, but the child I'd once held. Fragile, searching. Good. I reached out and touched his cheek. "You did all right, son." He covered my hand with his. "So did you, Mom." When I drove home that night, I passed the old prison gates, rusted now, overgrown with ivy. I slowed down but didn't stop. Once that place had defined me. Now it was just part of the scenery. The moon hung low, the road stretched endless. and the world felt wide enough for both our names to fit in it again. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Not the prisoner, not the outcast, not even the comeback story. Just a woman who had kept walking, no matter how long the road. And somewhere behind me, maybe for the first time, my son was walking beside me.